Welcome to Theology Thursday, where I attempt to take some of the things that I've gleaned from being involved with church in America for the last 20-some odd years and condense it down into usable chunks of encouragement and wisdom for current Christians who may be going through similar struggles. For those of you who know me, it would not surprise you if I told you that back in 1997, I chose to forego playing college tennis in order to work at a megachurch as the high school youth pastor. This came on the heels of interning there for 2 years, and it came on the heels of, during those 2 years, being told by some smarmy used car salesmen, megachurch pastors, that to forego college tennis and to work full-time at the church was the more spiritual thing to do. Now, I've written about this extensively, this whole experience from those 2 years all the way through 7 or so plus years of employment in megachurch world. And there's a link below if you want to read more about that experience in particular. But as you notice perhaps on the title of this video, on the screenshot before you clicked on it, it said recovered mega-church-aholic. Not recovering, but recovered. And I want to focus the majority of this video on the recovered part and how I recovered, how my wife and I recovered, how our family recovered, because it is past tense, and it was a difficult 10 years to get to that past tense, but I am thankful to say and joyful to say and relieved to say that it is past tense. There is so much drama in megachurch world. All you have to do is look at the falling out of Mark Driscoll and Tullian, James MacDonald, and the list could probably go on, of megalomaniac pastors who assume too much authority, spiritually abuse people, and leave a wake of destruction in their path. And so I'm hoping that this applies to a wide range of people who perhaps have been influenced by the culture of megalomaniac megachurch in this country. There are two things that turned that recovering to recovered, and they might come across as being controversial. It's not hyperbole by any means, though. These are real things that were revelations to me, which helped move us from ing to ed. And the first one was the realization that these narcissistic megachurch pastors are the equivalent of spiritual pimps. And you say, what are you talking about? How can you equate these godly men to being pimps? When you step back and take a look, these pastors promote an idea, an ethos, a culture that says, I will protect you. My message, my church, signing covenant agreements with my organization will protect you. And on the surface that sounds good because they're supposed to be shepherds and they're supposed to care for the flock. But what that leads to in these particular church environments of limited accountability, no accountability megachurch structures is that that's really disguise for manipulation and power control. So you enter thinking, yes, they're going to protect me and I want that protection, that's good. But the second you raise a question, the second you challenge either a theological belief, perhaps the way money is handled, perhaps the way there is different layers of elitism with the pastor's friends, and how certain exceptions are made for those that are on the in circle morally, and how the Bible is applied to everyone else, you really begin to see, wow, this is not protection, it's control and manipulation. So the first thing, light bulb went off in my head was, wow, these guys, these gentlemen are really the equivalent of spiritual pimps. It was sobering. It was a punch to the gut. And at first I felt ashamed for being so gullible to fall into that manipulation. But it led to the second realization, which was equally powerful, which is that they're the equivalent also of being spiritual drug pushers. And you say, what are you talking about? All you have to do is turn on a Hillsong United worship concert or watch any one of the popular evangelical webcasted church broadcasts, and you'll quickly discern that it is very emotional and very geared towards stirring emotionalism. It hit me, this was about 5 years ago when this hit me. We were at a secular concert listening to the opening band, and he was getting the crowd to sing along, and he had this simple chorus that was just repeating itself over and over, and he was cutting out the guitar and letting the audience, 40-some thousand people, just sing along with him. And I looked at my wife and I said, holy whatever, this is the modern church. And now remember, note that this guy in between songs was dropping copious amounts of F-bombs. And if you went to his social media pages, he was very licentious. Didn't claim to be a Christian, so not surprising. But the equivalence between this guy stoking emotions and what you see at all of these popular evangelical rallies, I was like, wow, these people really are spiritual drug pushers. They are selling a faith that is centered on the quality of and the quantity of our emotional response. And in light of, if ever our emotional response fades or dims or grows skeptical, that is not a sign that the message is incorrect, that the pitch is incorrect, that the content of what they are preaching is incorrect. It is indicative, according to them, of faulty faith on the listener's part. And that is a very, very powerful drug to get over. And it's very equivalent spiritually, soul-wise. You know, you see movies of these heroin addicts trying to get clean, and they're in the detox room shivering on a bed and in cold sweats. I do not overstate that during that 10-year desert faith wilderness period, that's how my soul felt over and over and over again. Because I had not accepted the fact that what they were preaching, that it was the content that was wrong. I still kept believing what they had sold me, that it was my response that was incorrect. So these two realizations, as they came home, shattered my whole framework for faith. It shattered my wife's framework for faith. And it was tumultuous. It was unsettling. But it led to that ing becoming ed. And it really led to asking questions if the pith, that's a good word, if the pith of what these megachurch pastors in America are selling, if that is wrong, if that is the mistake, not my response, but what they are preaching, if that's the mistake, if that's the error, then really what does Christianity consist of? And so it led down a path of asking, what does Christianity consist of? What does it mean to be a Christian? And this drove me to very old authors. It drove me to Puritans. It drove me to Spurgeon, which ironically all these people preach, although they don't understand him. It drove me to historical confessions. It drove me to liturgy. And what I found and discovered in these things is that the core of Christianity is most accurately expressed in the traditional confessions of faith and in traditional liturgy. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, we've had friends go through similar processes, and they've landed in Lutheran churches. They've landed in conservative Presbyterian churches, which is where we have landed. And instead of putting the emphasis on the quality and quantity of our emotional response, these churches put the emphasis solely on one thing. And to be a Christian, according to these traditional churches, is centered on one thing and one thing alone, and that is a belief in the historical life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Boom. Foundation. No more tumultuous sea of emotions of how's your response today? Well, and how do you feel now? Well, what happened after this? Do you feel spiritual? Are you experiencing God? All of that went away, and it's almost as if Jesus said, "Peace, be still." And those waves of emotion and confusion and manipulation just went boom, and it was still. And instead of being on water in a boat, it was like we're transported to a rock, a solid rock, a foundation, which said, Christ is Christianity. And you say, yeah, that's all great, but how? Well, of course we have to respond a certain way. Of course God wants us to do something. And those battles are understandable. Those questions are understandable. The money quote, the brush masquerading as a mic drop, came in the form of a gentleman who's now one of my ultimate homeboys, Octavius Winslow. Homeboy's dead, lived in the 1800s, and he preached at the opening ceremony of Spurgeon's Metropolitan Tabernacle in 1861. The link to this sermon is below. If you're a Christian in America and you're tired of this tumultuous sea of pastorpreneur manipulations and all of the junk that goes with that, and you know what I'm talking about if you've been in these situations, click on this link below to this free sermon and read the whole thing. But here's the quote. And you hear about addicts, heroin addicts or drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever the case may be. And when you hear about the recovery story, there's always a moment where it's like, and that's when the chains were broken free. That's when I was freed from whatever that nonsense and garbage was in the past. This sentence was it for me. And it turned that ing for 10 years into a solid, definite ED. That's recovered. No other sort of ED. Quote, he wrapped up his sermon this way. And compare it to how altar calls are given in all these churches I'm talking about. The comparison is so drastic, and I love it. He says, come away from your fickle love, come away from your weak faith, from your little fruitfulness, from your uneven walk, from all your shortcomings and all your imperfections, and let your eyes of faith repose where God's eyes of complacent love repose, on the finished work of his Son, Jesus Christ. 1 second. Again, brush masquerading as microphone. Boom. Here's the little secret of, I think it's the unspoken dirty underbelly of American evangelicalism, is if we really believed in substitutionary atonement, that statement captures the end all for the Christian. But the dirty underbelly is there's so much revenue and so much fame and personality and conference attendances and book deals and all of this underbelly of spiritualized business. Think maybe money changers in the temple. Think maybe Simon the magician trying to sell the gifts of the Holy Spirit for profit. The dirty underbelly is that mic drop statement, that pith of Christianity dries up all of those extracurricular activities that the entire system has been built around. I'll close with this. It reminds me of a Thomas Paine quote, another gentleman that proceeded right before this ED. There's a dude named Thomas Paine who was one of America's founding fathers, and he had a quote, and I'm not even sure what his faith was like. I haven't read much about him, but he had a quote. He said, "Christianity has become a religion of pomp and circumstance in supposed imitation of the meek and lowly one, Jesus Christ." That preceded, that was right at the end of that recovering and moving into the recovered. So I'm sure there's listeners, because I have family members who've worked at Mark Driscoll's church and been devastated by all of his shenanigans. I've had friends who've worked at other unnamed pastorpreneur disaster places, and I know that the fallout extends. It's not just limited to one thing. It extends and it reverberates. So if you are a Christian who is tired of this stuff, is tired of the emotional manipulation, I would encourage you that it's time to admit that it's the content of their message which is incorrect. They are spiritual pimps. They are the equivalent of spiritual drug pushers. It's the content of their message that's incorrect, not your response. Go look, turn your eye of faith to where the eyes of God the Father rest and repose on the finished work of Christ, and I guarantee you'll begin to find peace for your soul. And I should probably pick up that brush one more time and proverbial mic drop it. Thank you for watching. Please share with anyone who you think might be encouraged by this longer than anticipated video. Questions, comments below. Links to a ton of free resources below. My default position is that if you can't get spiritual guidance or wisdom or commentary for free in this day and age of practically zero cost distribution, you should avoid it at all costs. So there are links below to all these free resources that hit on this topic of turning your eyes of faith to Christ and Christ alone. And below that, there are links to the same content if you want it in book format. So you have that option if you do want to buy it. Thank you for watching, as always. I really do truly hope this is an encouragement to Christians who've been impacted by a lot of the unnecessary drama that has surrounded American megachurch for far too long. Have a wonderful day.